All right. I'd like to welcome everybody to the Public Works Committee meeting for the month of July. It's a rescheduled meeting. Roll call, please.
Chairman Lockmiller,
Here.
Alderman Leahy,
Here.
Alderman Weggie.
Here.
I have Alderwoman Parker Tice absent.
Move on to approval of the agenda. Any changes to the agenda? And the agenda shall stand. We have no announcements or appointments, so we'll move right into citizen comment. Anybody from the audience like to get up?
Eddie Fitzgerald, Radley Court. I was just wondering what the policy is when the storms that we've had recently, and there's a lot of big, ugly limbs laying around different places. I know a lot of it was cleaned up pretty well the next day, but some, is it just if it's totally on your property, it's up to you? Because some of them are really big that people would have no way of like cutting those up or anything. There's some really big ones laying around. Right over at the Congregational Church, you got half of one of those Bradford pears laying there.
Yeah.
So what is the policy?
Dan, you want to chime in on that? Or is that Eric? So we can get right to that.
Policy is if it's a street tree, if it's a tree on a public right of way, staff gets out there and takes care of it and chips it up as much as we can, depending on the time, night of day. If it's after hours, we'll try to clear the road, clear sidewalk, and then maybe try to get the rest of it the next day, depending on what it is. If it's a branch or limb on a private property, then it is up to the property owner to take care of that. So if it is something like that, they can chop it up and put it together in the Wednesday in the yard waste day, but has to follow the city's yard waste policies. So within 4 foot, yeah, it has to be bundled, 4 foot and bundled.
Well,
Go ahead, Ian.
the lemma that we have is this, the limb that we're talking about in particular is on a church property. So it does not fit within the city's yard waste pickup arrangement.
Yeah,
So,
and property, like businesses, typically that will need to contract out with someone
Yeah,
to take care of
to
things
work
like
with.
that. Yeah.
oh, yeah.
Well, if you'd like to report those, Patty, to the city, and then they can at least go by and see if it's something we need to handle. Anybody else? All right, we'll move into reports of chair or alderman. I just have a question, and I think I'll direct this to Eric. Once again, if you want to come up. At the last Board of Aldermen meeting, there was a citizen that was curious whether we could rename a park. And I was just wondering, I don't think you probably had time to look into it yet, but I was wondering if you could maybe check in what type of policies we would have to have or what.
Yeah, I'd be happy to look into that. I did some brief research that night and a little bit the following week. Looking at city ordinances, does not look like we have a city ordinance that speak to renaming any parks. I believe we do have some that talk about renaming renaming streets and plats and things like that. So there's an approval process for that. But there is nothing as far as parks. We do have, when we passed the naming rights policy last year, we did have some policies for naming rights, but that wouldn't really pertain to what was spoke about, which I believe was something for Thomas Madden, because
Right.
Obviously that was a historical figure which would fit within our naming rights policy. So that would fit within that. But there is no typical ordinance that I found. We'd have to do a little bit more research. Happy to do that and see what we can find.
Would you mind is that all right with the committee if Eric checks into that further for our next meeting?
Great. Happy
Thanks,
to do it.
Eric. Alderman Leahy?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. We received a request from a resident. In the city's activities, we're going to get down to old business on line 9B on streetlight improvements. They have made a request for us to consider looking at the Ameren pole at Lewis Avenue and the Shell Circle K. When the Circle K group closes at night, that whole area does go very dark. So they suggested that maybe the city might want to look at potentially having a street light put in that area. They were kind enough to give us a poll number to work with. Can I forward that on to Dan's group to at least look at and see if it would qualify for a potential lighting?
Want to discuss it at that part of the agenda?
Well, I don't know that, what we're gonna do on the agenda is the 20 that we budgeted for the year. I think we have 130 something that were in the list. I do not believe that this specific
this would be
poll
additional.
is in any of that 130. So what I'd love to do is have it looked at and evaluated and see if maybe it should be, and then what it would take to get it where in the financing if it was acceptable. So that's the suggestion I was asked to bring forward. So Dan, if I send you an email, at least you'll know where I'm coming from? Thank you, sir.
Is that it?
That's all I have, sir.
Alderman Wiggy? No report. All right. Move on to city administrator report. I hear crickets. I believe Bull is going to speak on the budgeting process, and I know that she would like ahead of time, if anybody has any ideas or projects, or if any of the citizens have relayed anything to us, to try to get that to her now instead of later in the budgeting process. So send her an email if you have ideas for the budget. And then I believe if we move down to item B, we have a presentation on Stormwater Capital Fund by MSD. And I guess if you guys want to come on up and give your presentation, state your name and
First of all, thank you for having us here tonight. My name's Richard Ummerfirth. I'm the Director of Engineering for MSD. I have a couple staff members with me tonight, Rebecca Losley. She'll actually be your point of contact on the information that I'm going to provide tonight. And Sean Hadley with our public information is sitting back here as well. And he'll be involved from the public information standpoint. So we do have a slight agenda for you tonight. You do have a copy of it in front of you. It'll be like this, and we'll also have it up on the screen. There will be time for questions, and this is a process that's going to take several months, so there'll be time for more questions as we move forward. So on the agenda tonight, I want to just give a little brief overview of MSD, a little history of our stormwater services, with a couple elections that we had in 2016 and 2019, where we're going from here moving forward, the potential for revenue and funding options from some existing ad valorem tax that exists that currently are set to zero. Talk a little bit about our timeline for the potential of reinstating those taxes or turning those taxes back on, and then have some time for questions. There'll be plenty of time for questions. If you do have one in between, just raise your hand. I'll be happy to answer it. Kind of MSD overview. The district's government utility, we have a 6-member board of trustees, 3 from the city of St. Louis, 3 from the county. We do manage 2 utilities. We have a wastewater utility and a stormwater utility. Our service area is about 520 square miles, basically bounded by the Missouri at the north, the Mississippi on the east, the Merrimack on the south, and our western boundary is basically Highway 109 out in Wildwood. So we don't cover all of St. Louis County. About 1.3 million customers. We serve 88 municipalities within the district area. We have 7 treatment plants throughout the area. This area here is served by our Lime wastewater treatment plant at the end of River de Pere. We treat about 350 million gallons per day at those treatment plants. We have about 4,700 miles of sanitary sewers, and then about 1,800 miles of combined sewers, which is primarily in the city of St. Louis. We have 3,000 miles of stormwater sewers that we maintain throughout our district. And right now, with the mileage that you see there, we are the 4th largest sewer system in the United States, basically handling our wastewater system. The next slide is a copy of our district boundaries. Again, we've got the major highways, and what you see marked in red there should be red on your map, are a number of what we call OMCI sub-districts that have existed since the 70s and 80s, were put into place to provide taxes and funding for both sanitary, at the time, both for sanitary and stormwater services. Once we resolved our wastewater rate issues around 2000, we were strictly using those ad valorem taxes for stormwater only. And we were using the funding generated by those taxes for both the operation and maintenance of the stormwater system. And we were also doing improvements for wastewater, for erosion and flooding. So those are the taxing districts primarily that we're going to talk about tonight. There's a total of 12 of those. You can't see real good with that map, but there are 12 separate, and they're basically bounded by watersheds. So a lot of them are named after different creeks and watersheds throughout the district. And if you look at the light blue areas, there are no taxing districts that exist basically outside of 270, and then again within the city of St. Louis. There was a taxing district within the city of St. Louis at one time that was turned off. That again was used for mostly wastewater services. So what we're here tonight to talk a little bit about is those OMCI taxing districts, and I'll cover those a little more as I continue on with the history. Recall just back in 2016, seemed like a long time ago, because prior to 2016, all we had was that, I call it the donut, those red taxing districts to address stormwater. We had thousands of miles of sewers outside in West County and stormwater issues in the city. So storm sewers that are located at the fringe that weren't covered by these taxing districts. So there was an unequal service for operation and maintenance. Outside in 270, if somebody called, there was a storm sewer that had a cave-in over it. We didn't have funding to go fix it. New development was happening. MSD would accept new sewers from new developments. They turned them over to MSD, but we didn't have a funding mechanism. So when we came back in 2016, we said what we want is to get a 10-cent tax throughout the district so we could maintain that 2,500 mile or 3,000 miles of sewers I talked about earlier. Take care of the sewers we have out there. That includes the sewer inlets, the street inlets, and then mostly in North County, but there are some paved channels that exist. So any kind of infrastructure we had is why we generated this 10-cent tax. But when we went to the voters, we said, when we turn this new 10-cent tax on district-wide, we're going to turn off the taxes in those red areas. So those, we didn't turn them off, we turned them back to zero. Our board has the ability to turn those back to zero. And with that, the map that you're looking at right now, on this slide, you'll see about, I think there's about 75, 80 projects there throughout the district that we agreed to spend about $70 million to finish spending the monies that were still left in those taxing districts. So we're still doing projects. We probably have another year or two's worth of projects, and then there is no money for capital improvements. And that leads to kind of the next slide. In order to try to address some flooding and erosion issues throughout.
If I may,
Sure.
I want to keep it straight.
No problem.
So you're spending the money that's already been collected in the districts that you rolled back to zero.
Correct.
But these projects encompass not only the tax area that you collected the money from, but areas outside those districts that you did not collect money from.
All right.
Am I
the
right?
Dots, there are. The dots in yellows were from that remaining dollars in that tax I talked about that was in the city.
Yes.
So those are funding that one.
All right.
That were turned to zero. The ones in red, when we turned the new 10-cent tax on, about 10% of that we weren't going to need initially for operation and maintenance. So these are areas that had been neglected, so we we were doing projects in that area as well. So they're not from the taxing district, they came from the new 10-cent tax.
Tax. So you are using both old and new money to
Correct.
accomplish the projects that were on your drawing board at the time.
Exactly.
Okay.
Did that answer it? Any other questions? Just stop me if I start moving too fast. So in 2019, and we did quite a bit. Brian Holscher and Sean and Lance Lacombe, when he was here, came out and did a lot of outreach regarding Proposition S, the second Proposition S. So to try to address flooding and erosion throughout the district. Now we had an operation and maintenance equal across the district to maintain our sewers. Now we wanted to address flooding and erosion. In our system, we had identified probably about $500 million worth of work and about 500 projects that we were going to do. Everything was going to be done based on priority. It was going to be an impervious rate that we took to our voters based on the amount of impervious area each property had. We went to the voters. That issue failed. So basically, the district was back to just providing operation and maintenance to the existing storm system. But these flooding and erosion issues still exist. That $500 million isn't going to go away. In the interim, before we decide to go back and try at the voters again, we want to understand what the issues were. We think we got a good handle on it. Again, understand not everybody has a stormwater issue. So that didn't help. There were some things going on at the county at the time we were going to election so there were some confusion at the ballot box with that. We understand there were some issues concerning the way the ballot issue just read. So there's various things. We're looking at those. So we're sitting back. But in the meantime, we had inquiries to whether or not there was opportunity to turn the OMCIs in the interim while we wait to decide to go back to turn on or go back to another vote to turn those taxes on and start doing projects again within those taxing districts. And we had planned all along once we had, if the tax or if the impervious area had passed, there were area that actually wanted enhanced services. In other words, it said, if we weren't going to see enough projects in our area, could we have turned the taxes back on there? So we had always planned to come back and talk to all the municipalities within the taxing districts. We didn't think we'd come back this soon, though. So here we are, coming back to everybody again, kind of regrouping on the impervious area because our rate commission, when we met and before we took this to the voters, they wanted our fee for stormwater to be an impervious-based fee. Our rate commission did. So that's why we took an impervious-based fee to the voters. So I'm going to kind of continue on. These are the issues that still remain unfunded out there. You got the backyard flooding where water just sits. It has no way to get out without a storm sewer. You have erosion issues, mostly along creeks and major streams, but you could have erosion where we don't have storm sewers as well. And you have regional flooding, which is floodplain flooding. And obviously you guys have a big initiative right now going with regard to floodplain flooding. So moving forward, what we're here to do tonight and what we're going to be doing over about the next several months is going to the municipalities, and there's about 60 of them that are located in 12 separate OMCI areas throughout the district on that map I talked about earlier. And we're going to gauge the interest from the municipalities in turning on whether or not there's interest to turn the OMCI taxes back on. Those OMCIs are capped. When they were originally set up, they were set up for a 10-cent tax. Right now, the one for Deer Creek currently is at 7.8. That would be the max we could go. And that's some additional data I'll go over once I get through the presentation. It's in the other packet. And I'll talk about what that generates. But that's based on what we're allowed to do based on the revenue that's collected and the assessments. I'm not a tax expert, but that's kind of how it works. So in order to turn those taxes back on, there's a process. And what the process is, and our board has allowed us to do, is when the original charter was set up on these OMCI taxes, it allowed our board to set up what they call stormwater committees within each OMCI. So what we're basically doing is the committee for each one of the sub-districts is the representative from the municipalities. In other words, you're one stormwater committee member of the Deer Creek watershed. And I'll cover that because I've got the list of all the municipalities within Deer Creek. And each one of them kind of has a say in whether or not we want to turn these back on, leave them off, and what it might look like. It's not going to be, it doesn't necessarily have to be unanimous. What it's going to be, it would be a recommendation. We'll be meeting with all the stormwater committee within the watershed, the OMCI district, and if we feel there is consensus amongst that group to turn the OMCI taxes back on, we would recommend to our board to turn that back on. It's their decision. If they felt like, in other words, if they make that call, they'll be the ones making that decision to turn that tax back on. And again, we would recommend, based on the consensus we received from you, we've had a lot of questions. What does consensus look like? Is it 51% of the municipalities within there? Is it 70%? We're hoping not to say. We kind of want to get a feel for it. I mean, if you get a feel that, just put it this way, if it was a 50-50, I would have a tough time standing before my board telling them, we think you should turn that tax back on. But if I'm seeing the majority of the municipalities and everybody within that district, we would probably recommend to turn that OMCI back on. And again, I know there are questions in your mind, and I'll be able to answer some of them here shortly. So again, here's the OMCI districts that exist. Brentwood sits pretty much right in the heart of the Deer Creek OMCI. So you're in one OMCI. We have municipalities that are in multiple OMCIs. I met with the city of Shrewsbury, which I happen to live in. Their city bounded by 3 different OMCIs. So I discussed the 3 different scenarios to them with regard to the OMCIs that they had last night. So there's a lot of individual discussion that's going to happen over the next several months. Moving forward, after we provide this information to you tonight, I mentioned Rebecca earlier. She said she was working the phones today. By the end of July, we had a kickoff meeting down at the city. Bola actually attended and invited us to the meeting tonight and collected some packet and some information you may have already got. I'm covering the same information tonight. But the next step will be to try to during the month of August, bring the majority of the municipalities located within the Deer Creek watershed just together to sit down, discuss what I'm going to talk about tonight, issues you might have, things you might have questions about. Hopefully Rebecca will be able to answer all of them, but I'm sure she'll have to bring some of those back, then we'll have to address at our management level. Again, that committee that she gets together from the municipalities basically establishes a stormwater committee for the Deer Creek watershed, which our board allows us to do. And then over the next 2 months, I'm going to talk a little bit, we would have reached some type of consensus on whether or not to turn those back on. And understand you've got small municipalities, you've got large municipalities, and so when everybody gets together, it's going to be up to everybody to kind of answer each other's questions. Well, why does this benefit me, or why does it not benefit me, and what do we see as a movement going forward? So when we looked at, okay, how can we administer the funding in these OMCIs? Prior to 2016, MSD basically took the funds generated within each OMCI. We took the highest priority projects based on a benefit cost ratio, and we took the money that we generated and we built projects to the best of we ability that we could. All 12 OMCIs together generate $9 million. Deer Creek's one of the larger ones. I'll talk a little bit. I think it generates about a third of that, maybe even a little more. So that was 9 million is only about a third of what we were going to collect with the impervious. The impervious rate was going to be about 30 million. So it's a lot less funding than we were hoping for to address those issues, but it is some funding. We have this one option is for us just to collect that money like we did prior to 2016, take the highest priority projects in the Deer Creek watershed and plan them, design them, and build them. That was one option. So we started looking, and we got a lot of input when we were going to our rate commission back in 2018 before we decided to go to the voters for the impervious rate. Municipalities were always interested in, you know, what happens if I don't have a project? What can I do in my municipality? We're helping pay for it. We understand, I think most municipalities understand that stormwater is not necessarily, it is somewhat individual, but it's a regional issue as well. I mean, if there's flooding in your region, it's not good for the region, period. So, and I think that's why we had as much support as we did for the impervious rate. So we said, this was kind of Brian Holscher, myself sitting around, so, and with some input from some of the rate commissioners. So what can we do to maybe enhance what this looks like? So we said, what if we split the funding that's generated by the OMCI? 3.5 million for the Deer Creek watershed, and the 50% would go to the municipalities based on what the municipality would generate. So in other words, the city of Brentwood would see 50%, and we're going to cover that. I've got some in the second handout. 50% of the OMCIs generated, that is generated within the city of Brentwood. The other 50% would go into a pool, and MSD would just do the highest priority jobs within the Deer Creek watershed. And again, till I get into the next step, you won't be able to see what that might look like. But okay, so what can the city do with their 50%? We want to be real flexible with that 50%. If it has anything related to stormwater, we want to allow it. Take, for example, we've had discussions, there was a small municipality in the Gravois watershed. No projects identified, but they're going to get a 50% share. He has culverts in his municipality. He drops about 40 grand a year cleaning those culverts out after big rain events at the city's dime, you know, and I think his share was going to be about 20,000. He said, well, that's 20,000 that I don't have right now that I would have in order to do that. That's the type of thing. We have been asked, what if we don't have a stormwater study for our municipality that identified all the issues? Some cities do, I think Brentwood does. Can we use that if we wanted to pay for with our engineer and get a stormwater study? Well, that helps them because then it gets their issues into our system for future stormwater projects where we might not have them in our system. One municipality talks about, well, what about detention basins? Well, detention basins are private. They're to be maintained by private entities. But you know, and I know they don't all get maintained like they're supposed to. And some people have revenue to do that, some of them don't. Some of them talked about, well, what if we did, could we use it for a one-time help of a municipal, or for a subdivision detention basin? Shrewsbury last night, there's a lake. They don't know, a lot of ownership issues with it. It needs to be dredged. Nobody wants to take responsibility to the detention basin. So could we use it for that? That's what we want to be flexible with going forward. Another would be is, can we save it up and go down? So the district will have about 5 years of projects we'll identify. We'll get in the queue, planning, design, easement acquisition, construction. To get a project through, it's 3, 4 years, depending on how big the project is. What if we're down here? We got a project down in year 10. That's more important to us than other projects. Could we use our money and go ahead and do that? Or put it with our stormwater parks money? Or can we save up for 2 years and move that one up and do it? That's the type of thing the city could do with their portion of the funding. So those are the types of things we're looking to do that. So, because I know we're wanting to get into the individual dollar amounts and what that might look like. What's our time frame? I said about 3 months. So we're going to be talking with the individual taxing districts for about the next 3 months, hold those stormwater committee meetings, and then come up with a final recommendation. Our goal is to go back to our board. It says October through December. In reality, we have to go to our board in November and December, and they have to pass an ordinance whether to turn these back on, because we have, in January, we have to notify the state of Missouri that we want to turn these back on. The soonest we would see revenues for this would be January of 2021, which is our fiscal year 2021. So that's when those taxes get paid in January, by December 31st next year, then those funds will come in, and by that time they would be ready for distribution. In other words, we would have, depending on how it goes, we have some municipalities that would prefer MSD just do all of it. So we envision some of the 12 will be MSD, take care of the 100% highest priority. We envision some of the OMCIs being 50-50. Shrewsbury's in a situation where they are the only municipality within the taxing subdistrict, and they have no projects. So they're kind of in a quandary. Do we, they have stormwater issues, but probably not enough to raise to the level of a major project. But do they take the amount of money that they generate and do other things? I use an example to them is you have a street program and you want to replace the inlets as part of your street program. We could reimburse that portion of your street project with your bank dollars. So there's little things like that. So 50% for some that don't have project, that's an opportunity of funding that right now might come out of their regular funding mechanism. So we'll make the recommendation to our board in December, and then we'll move on from there. And obviously that won't be the end of the stormwater committees, because then we'll have to communicate with you when the dollars, we'll have to put together our list of projects, what would be with our 50% or what the whole list of projects might look like. Before I go to questions though, I think we'll go ahead and go to the second packet that you have in front of you. I have a staple in the left-hand corner. I'm going to skip past and go all the way to the last item in there, and that's kind of a map of the sub-district area. As you can see, Deer Creek, in fact, as I was explaining it last night, it's hard to think about it. Obviously, you're right in the heart of it, right here in Brentwood, but it goes all the way out to the western part of Creve Coeur. That's how large this watershed is. Somebody goes, so a drop of rain out there in the Creve Coeur runs right through Brentwood. And you guys are aware of that, follows Deer Creek all the way down. So it's a large watershed, but it has like 20 municipalities. So Rebecca's got her hands full trying to pull all these folks together and discuss what we think we might do with it. But if you go to the very beginning of it, Deer Creek also has one of the largest listing of projects that are available. And in that list, they are sorted, you're right at the very top. And it looks like there's about $33 million worth of projects identified. Obviously, one of those is one major job. And it was something we did buy a couple buildings a few years ago in the Hanley Industrial Court. But those are, and again, we take projects at any time. If somebody has an issue, we'll evaluate it. If it's a project, we'll identify it. So Those are the three projects that we have listed for you at this time. So I'm going to go next to the sheet right in the middle. It'll say OMCI data by OMCI district. It'll say Deer Creek, Brentwood's the top line. The total watershed generates, that 10-cent tax will generate about $3.7 million a year for the entire. So if we went to the 100% route, the district would simply try to plan, design, and construct $3.7 million on an annual basis. If we go to the 50/50, you would go all the way to the right. And again, it's the amount of revenue that the city of Brentwood generates of that 3.7 total is 242. So the city of Brentwood's share of that would be about $121,000 that would be available on an annual basis to the city of Brentwood to use for stormwater, anything stormwater related. If you had a $250,000 project that was down here and you wanted to wait 2 years and do that project, or if you had a $250,000 project and you wanted to take 120, half the money out of, say, your stormwater and parks tax and go ahead and perform and do that project ahead of when MSD has it scheduled, that would be fine as well. All we're going to ask is, again, that the funding be, in other words, every time you would make a request for funding, we would have to go to our board. We'd have to explain to them, here's what they're using it for, and they're going to want to see that it's for stormwater. So that's really kind of ends my presentation. You have the information. Again, Bola's, we've talked to Bola, and she wanted us to come talk to you. Obviously, it may not be the last time we come and talk to you, but at this time, I'd be happy to answer questions from you all or anybody out here that maybe has questions as well.
Richard, looking at that last page you gave us on the revenue, in the Deer Creek, if everybody participates, it's 3.7 million, right?
Correct.
If some people opt out,
It's a all or nothing.
all or nothing?
Yep. That's why we, everyone in this municipality would have to agree, and not necessarily, it doesn't have to be unanimous. Again, if there's a general consensus that that the Deer Creek watershed would benefit from turning this on. That's really kind of how I've always approached it. Would the Deer Creek watershed, not necessarily Brentwood, Ladue, would the Deer Creek watershed benefit from turning this back on and to address flooding and erosion? And there's a consensus to do that, then we would recommend our board.
And then on if we do the 50/50 option and we receive that $121,000 annually, if we've got a few projects that we want to do here, do we have to run it through the trustee board of?
The dollars would have to be appropriated. In other words, we have projects that we do now where there's some municipalities will do 50/50 projects. And that's because they they want to be able to design them and bid them and build them and have the control over them. It would go through our normal plan review process, just like a developer would or anybody developing. Like you guys, if you guys do a complete street rebuild, that comes to MSD for review. So that project, once it's designed. Now, if it's something small, that you're doing, or if it's inlets as part of a street project, that street's going to come through, and what you'll be doing is seeking reimbursement for that portion of the job. And we would take it to our board, appropriate the dollars. Again, we would explain to them what we call it. Basically, what we do is we enter into a government agreement to reimburse you for that project.
Well, we've got some issues with individual sump pumps causing nuisances and that type of thing. That'd be stormwater, but we don't just get a check for $121,000.
No,
everything's got to go.
Yeah, you would have to say, here's what, and again, that's a real good example because we do have some municipalities that have that, and they've asked us about, green infrastructure, our rain gardens, which is really our not trench drains, but French drains, things like that to address those issues. Perfect example, if you guys wanted to participate in that, do the work, then turn it over to the homeowner and say, that's fine with us too. Again, that's addressing a stormwater problem.
Go ahead.
What is the mechanism that you'll know if you have consensus? Are you looking for each board to, pass a resolution or something?
Well, that's been asked, and some boards may feel that that's necessary, but it looks different everywhere. If you feel like you have enough between your Board of Aldermen and speak, one of the things I talked with the city of Shrewsbury, I hate to keep bringing them up, but they ask, what was the support for the Proposition S? So I'm going to get them that information. And most of this area was favorable. So obviously close to 50, over 50% of your people have an interest in addressing stormwater issues. That might be consensus enough for you all to say, hey, it looks like our people want that. Some of the smaller ones, they're not going to go to the vote of their people, but they're going to invite their people in to see what their thoughts are on it. Most of the ones we've talked to, we're attending public works committees, Board of Aldermen meetings, things like that, and most of them felt like they had enough, understanding of the issue. So we don't necessarily need a resolution, but if you're in that stormwater committee of the 20 people here in Deer Creek and say, yeah, we're interested, our board has a resolution in favor of benefiting the Deer Creek watershed, then we'd like to see it move forward. And then again, it's going to be kind of I hope no bullying goes around, but everybody's going to have to say, yeah, we're in favor of it. I don't think we're looking for a show of hands of the 20 municipalities, because we'll have some people that, that may not even participate. So, but like I said, if we feel like, or Rebecca's going to come back and she's going to gauge and say, yeah, I think this watershed's ready, then we'll recommend it to our board.
The project benefit cost, so that's just the ratio of some benefit to the total cost?
Correct.
So a higher number is better?
What we do is we do the benefit first. So if it's a backyard flooding, it's got a least benefit if it's going down somebody's basement stairwell drain or coming in their window wells. And that's generally when you have overland flow from a big rain, that type of thing. It'll get more when a structure is being flooded. Erosion the same way. You get more benefit because closer the erosion is to a structure. Fences, get one benefit if it going up and hitting somebody's detached garage or getting on the back side of it. Then it gets more points.
So the higher the number is the better?
The higher the benefit numbers, but then if it's a high cost to fix it, because understand some projects, the benefit costs, if it's a high cost to fix it. In other words, we try to find the most cost-effective solution. That's why when you really start looking at regional flooding, the answer is pretty much goes to buyout, because you can't build away the flooding that you can versus just taking that structure out of the floodplain.
Richard, I'm going to put your whole spin in a different light, if I may. And
Sure
I
may.
would love you to correct me where
Okay.
my reasoning goes south
Okay.
to work with. You come to the voters in 2016 and you ask them, can you all get on board with a funding program, Proposition S, so that we can do these flooding projects and stormwater arrangements? And they come back and say yes. And if we give you that yes, we're going to turn this tax off because it's all going to come in this tax. Now you're coming back to the voters and saying, I've got more projects that I need to get done because the problem is large, but I don't have the funding to do it. So now I want to go back and break my promise of putting this tax back in place. And if it looks appeasable, because we may get resistance, I might agree to split what that money might do 50/50, but I still have all this project over here that I can't fund, and that's why I need to turn the tax back on. Am I understanding that portion correctly?
Missed something early on.
Good.
The first 2016 vote
Yes.
wasn't for projects. Although we agreed to do some projects early because we weren't going to be spending all the O&M money up front. So the 10-cent tax that's district-wide is to operate and maintain the existing stormwater system.
Okay.
All the pipes and everything out there.
And it brought your city and your county guys outside
Everybody
your loop
even.
back into a funding source.
Right.
Okay.
Even, the ones that didn't have it, these people were already paying. I mean, I got a break. Because I was in multiple districts, and then the city had a smaller one. So it affected everybody different. That's probably the only thing. And believe me, we had that same conversation about, we agreed we would turn that to zero. So in other words, when I voted in 2016, I was voting for a wash. Living in Shrewsbury. But at the same time, when we were doing that, saying we would set these back to zero, there was some interest that after we voted the impervious rate and got $30 million and we started doing stuff district-wide, would we be able to turn those back on for added revenue? So take, for example, the Deer Creek watershed. If we'd have gone, we'd be doing $30 million worth of work, and the Deer Creek watershed came back and said, you know what, we'd like to see like $3 million for our area. We'd like to see, turn that back on, and we'll do $3 million. And
But
and
this
there was,
watershed
but-
isn't coming to you asking for that at this point.
we're
You're
coming
coming to
back.
them.
No, we're coming back for that but basically for that very same reason, is that there is nothing now. I mean,
Yes.
there's
Now,
going to be.
let's go to that portion of it.
Okay.
MSD went to an impervious fee, and they collected it for 3 years and then got challenged on that fee because they had never asked the voters to establish it. And thus, the rate commission said, that's right, it is a tax, it needs to go to the voters. You all collected $39 million in that process and only refunded $6 million back to your ratepayers and got to keep the other $33 million as a negotiated settlement with the rate commission for collecting a tax
Actually, it was
that
with
wasn't
the
approved.
It was with the Supreme Court.
Yes, to work with.
yeah.
So now you're coming back in 2019 saying, I want that impervious sewer, that tax reestablished. And this is where you got your 53-47 vote that said, no, they're not exciting about it to work with. So I'm back to, how does MSD literally justify, your voters have told you what you did wasn't right, what you want us to do, we're still not happy about, but you want to turn this tax back on with a promise that you would turn it off if you got the 216 vote. So I'm really questioning why this is happening. I don't
Because-
think your group is blind to the fact that your
No.
voters have already spoken on this.
We are, but there is interest from municipalities within these areas now that have come to us saying, okay, you're not going back to the voters for the impervious rate. You know, we're going to wait. We're not going to go right back. In other words, we want to reevaluate what we put out there. Was it too much? I mean, we put out what we thought the voters, I mean, we did polling and things like that. And, you know, and they may, 4 years from now, if we decide to go back and they vote it down again, then what's going to happen is at that point,
You have
So
flooding
then-
projects that need to be addressed.
and at that point, there's going to be nowhere else to turn but the municipalities. I don't know what else to say at that point, because if nobody wants to pay for it, we'll still maintain what's out there, but it's going to be difficult to do without voter approval.
I'm going to ask a couple more historical questions,
Okay.
if I can, Richard. At what point did the MSD group go from a quarterly, yearly bill to a monthly bill?
Probably around, we established our wastewater rates in 2000. That's probably when we did it. when
Okay.
I would
Early
say
two-
about 2000.
All right.
I think our wastewater rates at that time were,
And then right after that, MSD said, part of the water that we are treating and cleaning up through the process is coming from tap water that is coming out of the houses, let alone stormwater and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
So we agreed and allowed MSD to add an additional charge based on water usage at the home.
no, that's basically, we converted from, I believe it was a flat rate to actually billing for the amount of water that each home used. So it wasn't a add-on, it was a conversion into that. Before, everybody paid the same thing.
Yeah, there was,
And so it's like, in order to make it a true rate, you should charge people for what they use as far as water. And that was in 2000. Well, one, we had to go to change our charter to allow us to do that,
all right.
which
Yes,
created our rate commission. Then our first rate commission process happened in 2004. And then that's when the rates were established based on, I don't know the exact dollar amount per cubic foot of water used at each
Now-
residence or.
the voters also had a third vote that they did for you all, and I think it's the $26 billion project, and whether or not to have MSD fund it on its own and repaid through rate, or to have bonds issued, and that would raise the cost, but it was to defer how fast the bill got to the $95 a month bill.
Okay, yeah, that's.
And what
That's
does
the
that
wastewater-
money go
That's the
to?
wastewater rate.
Wait, and that money is strictly for
Strictly
waste.
for wastewater.
Thank
In
you.
other words, and actually, every 4 years, when we go to our rate commission, ever since 2004, we've really gone to the voters almost every 4 years
Yes,
for a wastewater rate to determine. What we do is, I actually was in our planning area before I was the director. We come up with a 4-year list of projects. We take those to our rate commission. We justify why those have to be done. The majority of our wastewater projects are being done because of our consent decree, which is the $4.7 billion program that we have 23 years to construct.
now, forgive me, you're using a figure of 4.7 billion.
That was in 2010. Right now, it's about $6 billion.
And that's where we went to the $95 a month bill, but we staggered it as it grows to that.
Every 4 years, that, based on what work we're going to do in that 4 years, we'll make an adjustment to that wastewater rate. In fact, we're in the middle of one right now. We're in the middle of a rate commission process. If you look back, probably since 2006, we've had double-digit rate increases for our wastewater program, typically about 10%,
Yeah,
all the way up until next year, this July coming up will be the last one. Our next 4 years, because of the program reaching a level, bonding versus pay-go, the district we're looking at, that's proposal right now, it's like 1.7, 3, 3, and 3. So all three less for this next 4-year rate increases than we originally anticipated. We anticipated we would still be going up. We've reached that level based on bonding and on revenue. The program is we still have a lot of program to go. Our current program it runs about $350 million a year.
okay. Now, that is strictly on the wastewater side.
Correct.
You're talking about wanting to do this on the flooding side for stormwater.
For stormwater.
Why would you think that the cost ratios of going through these projects would be any different? I foresee you all having a problem if we go, hey, let's option B, give them 50% and it makes it more palatable, see who comes up with a project. Yes, Brentwood, you can write up a project and submit it through, but we'll have to get it through the trustees of MSD to say, yes, we'll fund this, or no, we won't fund it. But we still have an MSD capital fund that we still need to fund to accomplish the task in front of us.
Correct.
So I'm thinking it just doesn't make financial sense. I think you all do better if you go back to the voters and say, I've got this problem. This is the only way to really make it work. This is how the funds generate. This is how it will be spent. And again, voters, you guys tell me, you're the payer, and come in. I think you all will see a lot of backlash from the residents when they go, wait a minute, they just keep raising and raising and raising, and how did they ever get around it? Now, I have to yield to the larger argument. Everyone in the St. Louis City and County area needs the sewer systems and the stormwater pipes to work, and nobody else is going to do it. If it isn't funded to make it happen, then you deal with the problems till we get it funded.
Right.
I think you all need to be honest to the voters and approach it that way than to try to come in from, well, it's established. Brentwood, you've got a property tax that is 42-cent ceiling. We could turn that back on within Hancock limits without ever asking the voters. But we know we'll see a backlash if we did that. You all will see the same thing. And I would love to see you all, take it straight to the voters again and just do a really good job of education and push it. You're not that far from that passage.
And that's, I mean, I could very well be sitting here, standing here in September and say, there's no interest in turning these things back on. They'd prefer us to take this back to the voters with some more education. Personally, I think the number is right. I think it's very similar to what most people were paying before. It's about, for a $200,000 home, it's about $25 a year. So $2.20, so it's not a lot, but it gets work. It's still 3 times more than what these would generate.
Yes, yes.
So,
And you all have a problem, and you realize the quicker you solve the flood problem, the easier the system is to manage going on. But if we don't give you the funds to manage it, then that problem will persist till we find that vehicle.
no, and this is exactly why we're here, for that exact input right there.
Okay, thank you, sir.
So do we need to go to the board for an up and down vote on what our recommendation is on this?
Yes.
So motion to take the decision to the big board?
I'm in favor of taking it. This is a decision that should be made by all the elected officials. I think that's the right place to make it.
Second,
I'll second his motion to take it to the whole board.
all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? No.
Would that be a resolution or something? Is that?
Well, Rich has said that we don't need a resolution, but I think for the board, making a resolution might be fine.
Now, there is no strong timetable, as Richard pointed out. He needs an October, November, December,
Yeah, I mean,
October, November decision so that you all can get it to the state in a reasonable turn on.
January, right.
Yeah, because they have to know something, but yeah.
so, and like I said, Rebecca's going to be reaching out. She'll be reaching out to BOLA and bringing the people together, because everybody's going to have the exact same, because a lot of times they don't understand the wastewater versus stormwater. You got it down pat. And then understand the same thing. We ask the same question is, hey, when we taxed you back in 2016, we said we're turning it off.
In my mind, I think the decision for the board would be, do you think there needs to be additional community engagement? Is it at the ward meetings? How do we seek input? Do you feel you know enough from our residents that there's strong concerns about stormwater issue, which we know. We had this at the last committee meeting. So then the board discusses. I expect that we'll probably bring this to the August meeting. It just depends on what we have coming, on the agenda, but there's no really good reason, I think, to delay a decision.
Other than it's going to take time to get that input. It seems like it's almost
Yeah.
like a resolution with 2 readings, right? We need to present
Yeah.
it to the board.
Present it to the board,
Allow-
the next meeting, or if there's another meeting,
Okay.
yeah.
All right, if nothing else.
All right, Rebecca will be in touch. You know how to get a hold of Rebecca, and we'll be happy to answer any questions. I appreciate your time today. Look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Richard, Rebecca, and Sean. Was that the other?
Yep, Sean Allen.
Thank you.
Out of the sewer and into the sewer lateral. We go.
Here we go. All right, let's move on to department reports. And Dan, I think you're up. We've got update on the sewer lateral.
Like our whole life, it's sewer stuff.
Rebecca?
Sewers. I guess the worst case, we could be dealing with a drought.
Oh, no, because then all the stormwaters stink because they're dry. And the city one stinks worse.
Okay. What I prepared for you guys was kind of taking you from where we were to where we are. So if you recall, a few years ago, we had no limit. We paid for cabling and cleaning. Then about a year or so ago, we actually put a ceiling in there. It was 7,250 per calendar year. Then just as of this year, Resolution 1084.2, we changed it from 7,250 down to 3,500, and we eliminated the cabling and cleaning. So since the April Public Works, we were asked to look at some other items because we're early enough on with the budget cycle that we could make these changes and then roll them out in 2020. But some of these have cost impacts, so we want to know what they are now before we take it to the board and get it in the budget book. So some of the items we looked at would be cost responsibilities, and if we go with the same procedures that we have in place now, we want to put together a frequently asked questions and have some sort of graphic or executive summary of the program. A lot of people, I guess they don't take the time to read it, or they read it and they don't understand it. So we thought, is there a way that we could make it a little bit simpler? And then also, the one thing I've noticed that some cities have already started doing, in particular, it was Richmond Heights, Ellisville, and Baldwin, they limit the program to defective sewer laterals only, those that have blockages, not part of a home sale contingency. So if you have it scoped and they say, hey, there's a crack in it, that doesn't mean that it's going to lead to a backup. It just means there's a crack, a defect, but it doesn't actually fall into the defect that we're looking at for resolving this under this program. We want it where it's offset and there's dirt getting in the pipe and it leads to backups, not, hey, there's a fine crack and it's an 80-year-old pipe. It's to be expected there's going to be cracks in an older pipe. And then lastly, to maybe help explain, since the limit right now is 3,500, there are private sewer lateral policies you can get as a homeowner, just as there are plumbing, there's, air conditioning, furnaces. There's pretty much a warranty for anything you have that's mechanical at your house. But it would cost you. The city can't take its money and give it to a private individual. We can't take public funds and give it to the private entity. So looked at all those different things, tried to boil it down. So if you look under recommendation, the simplest thing for like the private insurance was we could include a link if you wanted us to. The ones that I found that are fairly big companies, there's two in particular, American Water Resources and Service Line Warranties of America. Or we could choose to do nothing there. But if you wanted to promote it, you could not recommend them, just say, there's a link of companies out there that provide this, or they could do a Google search or whatever on their own. The other main thing for us to contemplate at this meeting would be, do we want to keep the repair process the same? Do we want to make changes? And by changes, I mean, do you want us to get a quote, the property owner to get a quote under a non-emergency situation, or other cities put the burden completely on the resident or property owner? So that resident or property owner would obtain 3 quotes, bring it to Public Works, and then they would be evaluated. And the other thing that some of the cities do and others don't would be, once you select one of those of the 3, the property owner pays 100% up front, and the city just becomes a reimbursement tool. So that 3,500 wouldn't come about until after all the paperwork's turned in. It would go to the warrant list, so the resident or property owner would be out that money. If it's a $6,000 bill, you're out $6,000 for however long it takes to get that 3,500 back. So these are pretty major changes if you wanted to overhaul it, or do you want to keep it the same? And, it's kind of up to the committee.
Andy?
If I may, Mr. Chairman, Dan, we got a couple other issues that have to be at least put on the table.
Right.
Currently, the lateral sewer program is in debt because we've overspent a couple of years more than we've revenue. Do we have a number as to how in debt we are?
I believe that Karen had ballparked it before. I don't want to just speculate. It was a couple $100,000.
So 100,000 or 200? He said a couple hundred.
To something. Yeah.
Okay. And our yearly revenue coming in from the homes that participate in this program has dropped from the 192,000 down to what?
It went from 193 and we lost about 50,000, round number.
So we're down to about 140?
148, I think, is what's in the budget book.
To work with.
And that's why we reduced it from 7,250 to 3,500.
500.
If you look at Fundware, we're about at the halfway point in a year, and we've only spent about half of our expenditure line. So we're actually balanced, and if we don't have a whole lot more in way of claims this year, I would think we would at least finish at zero or possibly have a surplus that we could start paying that debt back.
Now, Bola, if I may, Mr. Chairman, because I want to get the facts right, because I can't go anywhere.
Fine.
Under the statute, we cannot use money from any other revenue source to cover the indebtedness. We have to use from the fee collected.
I believe that that opinion has been offered by the city attorney.
Attorney. Now, and the city is required to pay that back.
That
And the
opinion,
board
yes.
would have to establish a reasonable interest rate.
Yes,
Now, reasonable interest rate, I can't say zero, but I could get away with maybe 1, 2, 3%
That
to
is
work it
correct.
through, to work with. Now, I had residents on my street over the 4th of July that woke to a problem in their yard. And because it was a holiday, they couldn't even get a whole lot of people to help. So he was trying to do it himself. And they visited with me that evening because they were very frustrated. We are offering a service at $50 a year, and it turns out it didn't do what they wanted it to do. He was frustrated. I've got an indebtedness that has to get taken care of. At what point does the city itself have to evaluate to decide, I've got to stop the program, I've got to raise funds to be able to pay this indebtedness off to zero out? I think if you work your frequently asked questions and you say, by the way, let's go to XYZ insurance company, we're going to get into trouble in that end. So I would just say, sorry, we're not in that business to do it. But I think we need to cut our losses and work a way to get out of debt and do it as quick as possible. And I'll tell you, the residents are not going to like, let's assume it's just a 2-year. I got to pay $50 for 2 years, but I get nothing for my 50. That's not going to fly well, because you're not going to allow to incur any additional cost till you paid off the debt. So I'm afraid that's where we're headed.
I mean,
Brandon.
I'm generally completely in agreement, right? This is getting worse and worse. It's neck and down. It's getting smaller and smaller. It's getting more and more confusing to the residents who know about it, because before it was great. It covered everything. Now it's like, well, it doesn't cover cabling, and it's $3,500, and like, it's just, I think it's a drag on you, Dan. I think it's a drag on the staff. I mean, we are not good in this business. I don't know, but it seems like there has to be a faster path out of debt if you've killed the program and it's a one-time transfer. It's more about sustaining operation of that with general fund revenue instead of a one-time transfer. I feel like there's a fast path out of debt, but we would work that either way. I mean, I'm of the opinion we got to walk away from this. And I know we had a couple months ago looked at, or Dan, you brought forward it was a private insurance company that handled everything, but it did require an ordinance kind of saying that was the preferred operator, and then it was up to residents or something, and then we were totally out of it. But I would be okay just saying, look, it's done. And the reason I think this is time critical is we're going to have to communicate this, over-communicate this to our residents, that this is changing, so that, come February, somebody calls and like nobody picks up the phone.
Well, your other thing is, and Bola, correct me if I'm wrong, we have to establish the tax by the 30th of August to get on the next year's billing cycle? Yes. We're topped at the 50, but we have to tell St. Louis
if we're
County.
going to change it, there is a timeline. I don't remember what that deadline is, and whether we've passed it or not.
Normally in August, we set all of our tax rates that we
September,
turn into St.
yes.
Louis County. That's
Right.
why I'm thinking,
Right.
isn't this one of those things that would have to be turned on?
It could be
Now,
turned off.
if turned off, but I can't turn it off till I've raised the revenue to
Right.
cover the indebtedness. So 2020 I have to assume the city of Brentwood is going to charge that $50 fee. The trick is, am I going to charge it and authorize repairs, or am I charging it to collect the revenue to cover the indebtedness? That decision has to be made. You're gonna have to charge. The trick is how do you cut?
I don't know how you sell that to a resident.
The
You-
limit
you-
is that
You
I'm in
collect the
debt.
assessment, but you get nothing in return.
My problem is state statute says I have to pay off the bill. I can't write it off as uncollectible.
Dan, how are we running on that fund balance right now?
We're actually doing well. I put just a little blurb in there. We were at like 46% of our expenditures halfway through the year.
Yep.
So that's why I think the 3,500 was a good number.
Karen, do we? What?
Well, yeah.
We transferred that 95,000, obviously we would be, but then we're gonna be more in debt.
So we're already out of money.
Yep, in June.
So it's only gonna get worse.
Well,
The
keep in
90
mind though, the
The 95
assessments
goes where?
Well, the
from the
assessment,
general fund to the sewer fund, also, keep in mind, most of the assessments don't come in until later on in the year. That's why we're in the negative. That 148,000 doesn't come in until like the property taxes do towards the end of the year. So when that starts coming in, then it won't be in the negative. But right now, in this point in time, if you look at June 30th, we are.
So the general fund floats this fund until December.
Yes.
well, I just don't see how we can pull the plug right now. Somehow we have to build up funds in this account.
Mr.
Going
Chairman,
forward.
give me a scenario in which you foresee building funds using the state limit of no more than $50 per house.
We got to weed down the benefit.
And we're doing that.
Yes.
Right.
And if I could ask Tom to come up, Tom Kramer, he's got some background in some of the project he had done and some of the bids he received.
Yes, sir. Testing one,
Want to
two.
come up?
So,
Want to put the two together, you'll get feedback.
thank you so much. I need to either elevate myself or lower the.
Might not be on.
Testing one, two.
There you go.
There have been measures introduced into the legislature to raise that ceiling, which hasn't been raised in some time. I don't know if that's ever going to be successful. What the city hasn't done in that regard is we've not sent a resolution to the state legislature about our hope that they will move forward on doing something like that, because we are not the only city that has sewer lateral funding problems. That's number one. Number two is I happened to find out recently, both as a board member and a happy resident of the city, at a property not too far from here on Anna Lee, where we had a sewer lateral project that was performed by our on-call provider. The city has a unique agreement with that provider to take care of all the services, which this was an example of when we had the old limit of 7,250, whatever it was, this would have gone right under the radar and gotten paid. Now that the residents are on the hook for anything over 3,500, I found out real quick that there's a big difference between sewer lateral provider repair companies or sewer laying companies, plumbers as it were. The company that we use right now for the sewer lateral repairs, I'll not give its name, but I've come to find out that they normally charge 3 times the norm. 3 times what the repair normally costs if it's not being paid for by the city of Brentwood through the sewer lateral program. What they don't know and what the providers maybe aren't educated on is the city's no longer paying the full tab. The residents now have to cover the other side of that. So what I found out is I went to some other providers for this particular situation and found out that was the truth. On a $7,000 project billed through the sewer lateral on-call program provider, I ended up getting bids in the $2,500, $2,800, $1,700 for the same exact repair. I said, why is that exactly? And they said, oh, really, don't you know this particular company that the city of Brentwood uses is one of the most expensive in all of Missouri? I said, that's interesting. But I guess when you're talking about funding shortfalls, there is some conversation that could be had regarding the costs, regarding the legislation, regarding the way the program is currently administrated, that I think at least might stop the leaky boat. How long has the leaky boat been leaking while we've been trying to fix the program? I don't know. Is it incumbent upon the homeowner who has a sewer lateral program to get the 2 or 3 bids? Well, in Webster and Kirkwood, I understand, and some others, maybe Ladue, there is an ongoing, in some of the municipalities, an ongoing practice where there's a lot of economizing. We don't have that, and I don't think it's on purpose. I think we just need to learn that and change it. But I am here as a homeowner primarily to let you know about the hardship that existed in this particular case. The provider that the city had contracted with, hounding me on a regular basis to get paid, when they found out that maybe they would be able to match another provider's amount, they jumped at that chance when it was $6,000. And I don't think they understand yet that tomorrow I'll find another one. There's a line of people who are willing to do that same work a lot cheaper. They're also St. Louis County licensed, they're bonded, they're insured, they're ready to go. Not every sewer lateral project is the same, I found out as well. What I have is an easy one. There are much deeper, longer, more comprehensive projects that are more expensive, and someone like the company the city has specializes in those types. But it doesn't work for every single case, and I believe the city and or the residents are now paying over what they need to be paying for at least a portion of the cases.
Tom?
Not at this time. I understand what you're telling us to work with. But, Bola, if I'm not mistaken, we went out for bid. No, it's a service contract, so we did not. We got to choose based on professionalism. Okay, thank you.
I think if we were to make this more market-oriented and lay, I don't want to say burden, but have the homeowner go out and get their own bids for the work, 3 bids. They choose then the bidder, and then we are just reimbursing $3,500 or less, depending on what the bid comes in. I think our costs will greatly be reduced.
Well, from a resident standpoint, I'm paying $50 because the city is charging me it. But you're saying, not only do I give you the $50, but I get the burden of solving the problem, and if I'm good, I can send the paperwork into the city to potentially get a refund.
I know, but this is, your roof starts leaking. I know we don't have a policy.
Exactly.
You figure it out somehow, and you get the bids, and you get it corrected. It seems like just because this is a city-administered program, all of a sudden, we're babysitting people through this whole thing. And
Yes.
it's taken up a lot of staff time, and I don't think it's competitive out there in the market the way we're doing it currently. And I think if we were more competitive, we'd get these costs down. Now, once we got this into a positive funding where we could start paying back the money we borrowed if we want to disconnect the policy or the program at that time, I wouldn't have a problem with it.
I thought residents could contract with whoever they wanted, and that's the way it was working. I didn't think they had to go to our on-call sewer contractor.
I wasn't given that opportunity.
I mean, if
But
you read
that's
the
a
narrative, the occupant of the residence is a contract with a plumbing contractor of their choosing to resolve the issue.
Yeah. I understand. That didn't work out in my case.
And I think that goes to, this is overly complicated process, right? Nobody, I can't understand it. We've talked about it 100 times, literally 100 times over the last 3 years. And
But if I'm listening to the both of you, we're still all in agreement that the program is not meeting what we wanted it to do. And I'm back to, then you cut your losses, cover your debt, and let's get out of this business.
Yep.
And I think that's something that we should take to the full board and ask the 9 elected members, are we ready to make that decision? If the answer is no, then yes, give me a way to make it financially work so that we do have a quality service that we can offer the residents.
Yep.
Without it, I think we're just hurting ourselves big time.
I'm with you. So I would make a motion that we take recommendation number 1, which is, get out of that business, take it to the full board, and then let staff, give us the options of how we get out of debt, whether it's continuing to assess the fee, of whether it's, there's a path for a one-time fund transfer because you're just covering, but it's not for ongoing. What is that path to quickly unwind the program? And we take that to the board and start hashing it out. I mean, I think we don't have a lot of time.
I'll second that motion, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Any discussion? Is that what you're raising your hand for?
No,
All right. Let's take it to a vote then. All in favor, say aye.
aye.
My vote's nay.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask Mr. Kramer a question?
Yes.
Tom, you would like us to read this as an educational, or is there something else that I'm not aware of that we should be doing with this particular?
I guess I'm open to suggestions. I need to work with the Public Works Director and the city administrator and the current on-call provider about how to address this particular invoice that they have. I sense that there's probably going to be some good common ground that might take us under the $3,500 limit. But my main reason here is to talk about the economizing that could be done until the program is finished, at least. If you decide to unwind the program, there's a lot of economizing you can do until that goes down. And that might prolong your ability to keep it in place or pay the money back.
Have the full discussion at the board level.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, moving on to item B. Dan, you're back up with the sanitation recycling service.
We were asked to take a look at sanitation in general to figure out where we are as far as the program, how many tons we're recycling versus what we did in the past, what it looks like as far as the quality control and things of that nature. So I'd put in a call to Republic Services. They had notified me that typically like 81% is actually recycled. So if you bring in 10 tons, only about 81% can be recycled. The other 19% is contaminated. And then as you follow down in the board docs, you'll see one of our staff, the supervisor, actually did an audit of some of the recycling carts. I don't know how many times it's on the website. We even updated the website to include exactly what Republic has. People put their recycling cart out, they've got cans bundled or whatever, tied off in Target bags or Walmart or wherever, and they throw it alongside of the cart. That is trash. They do not want the bags. The bags get twisted around the equipment, and it slows the whole production down. That's why China doesn't want our stuff. It's contaminated. So it stays here and it stays contaminated. I don't understand, in one of those carts, there's food waste. It's like they list what they don't want. If you put in Cheerios, how is it recyclable? I mean, it's compostable, I guess, but not recyclable. There was a wooden table leg. Instead of picking it up via household and actually incurring a cost, I guess they broke up the furniture and threw it in there and thought it could be recycled. So it's pretty frustrating, because the long and short of it is we get charged. It's $115 a ton, and whatever they sell off, then they reduce it down. So I put that little table in there so you can kind of see a trend of where we are with the recycling. After a few months, we're, I think, trending, towards $96 per ton. And a little bit of it has to do with contamination, and the rest of it, or the majority of it's actually the market. The market is pretty poor, whether it's aluminum, steel. They said that paper's flat, but it's actually negative flat, if that makes sense, that it costs you more to recycle some of the paper than it does, So that's kind of an unusual thing there. But the long and short of it is, like I said, it's $115 a ton. To take it just to a conventional landfill is $53 a ton as of June of 19. It's been trending between 50 and 53, so it's more than double to recycle it. And if it's contaminated, you're getting less of a rebate. I know that this year we're getting a rebate from the St. Louis Jefferson County. You know, that's several $1,000s, but next year I don't know if they'll have the same program, or we'll have to build it into our 2020 budget that these disposal fees are going to cost more and continue to cost more. So it's for information, you know, more or less, but if you have,
So thanks for putting this, I mean, the reason I wanted this is to start giving our residents feedback on how well it's working. And I
Right.
am shocked that 81% is being recycled, especially looking at those photos of, right, I mean, that's,
80-20 rule.
I
It
can't
works.
believe it.
yeah.
I can't believe it's that high, and I don't think it's about, you know, cost effectiveness, more like, are we doing more damage to the planet by driving it over, sorting it, and then throwing it in a landfill, right? Because it's all contaminated. If it really is 81%, then that's good news, but I think we gotta do something else on the education, or even empower maybe our sanitation workers to not pick the stuff up, right? Let's put a, you know, violation sticker on the cans if it's just totally unrecyclable, and say we're not taking it. And a lot of cities operate that way, right? If
Yeah,
it's
in the
not,
private sector, they do. Where I have Republic, if you put things in the cart, they'll put it'll be flagged and they'll be in their database. But I mean, we pay a bill too, so eventually they'll just opt not to pick yours up, and it doesn't matter what you want to pay, I guess. You know, here, I mean, people don't pay anything, so there's no penalty that we would incur.
well, I think if you don't pick it up, right? If you say,
Right.
I mean, at least in our ward, it's recycling on Thursday and it's trash on Friday.
Right.
So if it said, you know, we're not picking it up today, put it out for trash tomorrow because this is not recyclable, you know, that would be the consequence. I mean, I think it calls for a little harsher measures, right?
Right.
I'm in agreement with you, and a simple thing that just says, I can't take this because XYZ is present, or this is what it needs. Those few residents that are contaminating the truck is hurting everybody else
Right.
that's doing good.
Right.
And yes, I need to get the literature in their hands. I can't make them read it, but if you continue, sorry, your bin is sitting here and it didn't get picked up because the following is here and my guys moved on. If you want to fix it, great, we'll pick it up next week. If not, yeah, it's going in trash and I only paid 53 versus 115 to
Yeah,
work
because
with.
we've had the argument with them where people have come in and said, well, I put it in a clear bag. It's obvious it's recycling. It is a bag.
But it's
Someone's
not
gonna have to take a
acceptable.
box cutter and open it up, and then what do? We don't just throw it on the ground, and then, you know, we're littering then. We throw it in there, and it's considered trash then. It's no longer recycling. We're not gonna take the time to open each bag, and I mean, Brentwood Forest by itself is 1,425 units, and
Yep.
those are just kind of thrown into a pile. You know, they've got their recycling and trash on Monday. So these guys don't have time to sort hundreds, literally hundreds of piles, you know, in a day. It'll just kill us with labor.
Well, I think if we leave it behind, Brentwood Forest will get the idea and maybe get their own
Well,
campaign going.
And some of them are really good. I mean, they'll put it in either the little green cart or the maroon bins, because I know they don't want them to have the large 95-gallon carts.
Vince, yeah.
Unless, you know, that would be a rule that they'd have to change. If you could have one for a unit where everybody would put it into the cart and one person would pull it out to the curb,
Curb,
that
that would
would
work.
help us out, but I don't know how you go about
Do you
doing
know of any other municipalities that have some type of violation sticker or whatever they can?
University City does. I know I've spoken with them because they actually do their own collections. I'll have to check with Kirkwood since they do their own collections, but I know that they'll put a sticker on there and they actually have interns walk around and check their carts throughout U City. And they call it a oops program. Like they'll give you the first one as a gimme that it's a mistake. But if they keep flagging that same address that you're putting, we just had someone put yard waste. They put grass clippings in a green recycle cart and they put it out there. It's like, what is wrong with you? We don't want that. Like,
You still have
that's on a
those few
Wednesday and
people
don't
that
put it in the
need
cart. Now the
education.
cart's contaminated.
I mean, the punishment is that your stuff doesn't get picked up. I mean,
Yeah.
I would make a motion that we start, you know, not picking stuff up that's in clear violation and provide some mechanism. I'd like to see, you know,
Right.
this number that continue to be tracked. Maybe we add that to the weekly report. I mean, just to watch. As we converge on $115, that means that it's all going to the landfill, basically, and we're just not being effective.
Before we make that motion, could we direct staff to evaluate a way of trying to improve an education to see what works from within their arrangement to us before we tell them
What form-
XYZ?
what form-
I feel like
I'd like them to at least have a good input as to how best to work towards educating.
Actually, that is
Yeah.
in the
I don't
packet.
disagree, but I mean, we put it in the newsletter. It's been all
Yes.
over social media. I mean, it's on Nextdoor. There's been like
Everywhere.
conversation. I mean, I feel like, It's been,
It's been done enough?
I think
the only other thing I can think of
viola-
is to send out a mailer, which, you know, is like,
No, you-
then that'll all go. in
I
the
go 8,000
landfill.
homes or 4,000 homes to work with when I have maybe 110 people to fix. The
Probably-
stickering on what I'm picking up directly hits those that are violated.
Yeah, I think it's,
Let's educate them.
And we thought about doing an informational sticker that would say, stick with the six. That's the St. Louis County's, mantra.
Yep.
No plastic bags. It would be something simple you could put on the underside of the lid or the underside of the bin. We already put stickers on the little green cards that said recycling becomes me, so that, it's for recycling only. And then it's got, I think, some other logo on there or something. But
Yeah.
I know we can buy stickers and put them on there. And I thought, well, that might be simple. And I know, speaking internally, we talked about possibly doing like a magnet that you would put on your refrigerator. It's like, well, if you have a question, there's a web link that you can go to that we just put on our website to see if it is recyclable. Is an extension cord, a garden hose, they're not recyclable.
Right.
They're trash.
Yep.
I don't care how much copper is in an extension cord, don't put it in there. It gets bound around equipment. They don't want it. So you could look for creative ways to reuse it. Bags, they actually recommend taking them to the grocery store or opting for recyclable bags like Trader Joe's, Aldi. They have cloth, they have a plastic, like a polyethylene bag, and then you can use it over and over as long as it's
I think,
viable.
what, Brandon's got a motion. Did you want to second it?
We'll second your motion, Mr. Weggie.
What was your motion?
Well, so to start enforcing, right? So,
Yep.
train the sanitation workers on what is and is not recyclable, and then it's up to them if they see something that is, I would say probably egregiously at first, not recyclable, to not pick it up and provide some feedback to the resident of that's why it was not picked up.
Yeah, otherwise you're just going to be getting a large amount of phone calls. There's got to be some sticker or something applied to the why that wasn't.
Yeah, because the drivers right now, they do actually flag, like I know Yard Waste Day, whenever we've had people do creative things, they put a piece of twine around a log and said, well, it's bundled. It's like, it's still a log. It's a 4-foot, 100-pound log that we're not going to pick up.
Right.
So we'll tell them we're not picking it up, and here's what you could do to make it so we could pick it up. You can cut it in half and then split it, or, you can hire a contractor to get rid of it, but we won't be picking it up because it violates our ordinance.
But you're probably going to see a lot more of that. And so, I don't know if this needs to go to the big board or if we can just start doing this. I agree with the education, though. I think we got to keep doing stuff. I think we've
Right.
done a ton. But, what else can we continue to do?
You want there to be like a 30-day notice before we stop picking them up, or you just want to roll it out immediately?
When your stickers are available so that you can educate.
Roll it out
right
immediately at
then
the
and
same
there.
time?
Yes,
Okay.
I think that's a fair way to proceed.
I don't think there needs to be an education program because we've already had these
No,
programs.
we'll roll
It's
it out at
just
the same time.
Yeah.
Put a sticker on it and
And I'll say, this is a problem. Where I work, it's, banners everywhere. If you don't know if it's recyclable, put it in the trash, right? So
Right.
when in doubt, throw it away. So this
Ian,
is a problem.
I know that one of those links, you actually can type in a zip code, and if it's, recyclable batteries or latex paint, it'll say where you can go. There's, hazardous materials depots in St. Louis County.
What we'll also do so that the entire board has knowledge of this decision, I'll send out an email to the board and let them know we're going
Yeah,
to
'cause
roll
we'll
this
need
out
to- we'll need to start
effective
socializing
Monday.
it, too.
all right, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
All right, it's unanimous. All right, moving on to I'm sorry, I forgot my computer. So item C, Rosalie Avenue. There was an update there, Dan.
This was more for informational purposes. We had been asked what was the status of it. It's in the weekly report, but this is a little bit more detailed than the weekly report. I was assuming that Alderwoman Tice would be here, and this is kind of to bring you up to speed in case you had no knowledge whatsoever of the project. So I know you guys are already familiar with it, but in 2017, we submitted for the STP grant. We received the STP grant. It's in the STIP with East-West Gateway, and it's for a total of roughly $415,000. So it's $414,955. We'll have an 80-20 split. So $331,964 in essence would be a reimbursement through East-West Gateway. So for 2019, we're looking to spend roughly $36,000 with design. Next year would be easements and land acquisitions, and then the final year, 2021, would be the full-blown construction and the lighting, the sidewalk improvements, because there's a 4 or 5 foot wide walk on the post office side of Rosalie, from Brentwood over to Mary.
residents are just really worried about this. I mean, that.
Right, I knew that the question was, well, are we just going to see lights pop up? And that's not it. What we did initially was we talked to MoDOT. MoDOT set a DBE goal. And for this, because it's so small, they actually said we don't have to include anything. So it's 0% participation. So I had solicited from Horner and Schifrin a cost proposal because they're one of the LPAs. So we don't necessarily have to go out for an RFQ and do a whole evaluation and selection. Horner and Schifrin had already done Litzinger, they've done Hanley Industrial Court, they're familiar with us and these type projects. So they're working on a cost proposal so that then we can bring it through MoDOT. If it's approved through MoDOT, then we can bring the contract back to you all and issue a resolution and enter into that agreement with them
To do the design.
to do the design in 2019, which is what we're after.
Okay. And then we'll
And then
take
there
that
will
and-
be public input. We're not just going to put lines on a piece of paper and then say we're going to build it that way. It's going to have input.
Yeah, thanks.
Andy?
I'll request of both Horner Schiffer and the department, I'd like to know what we're doing with the trees along that area, how many we can actually work around or
Right.
thing. I would love not to just lose the whole side of the street with tree growth. And yeah, we'll put back little ones and get them back up, but that would be a heart. So if, as you're designing, somebody pay attention to how that plays in. It may create a problem, but at least we took a look at it and had it on our criteria instead of just, nope, they're gone.
Dan, thanks for the update.
Okay.
Moving on to item D, which is Eric, we've got a Heights membership update.
So I've just an update, a memo. This is something that's going to be discussed tomorrow at Ways and Means, but we just wanted to give you the quick update, which is, as you may or may not know, in 2009, up until 2009, the city was paying a fixed rate for memberships over at the Heights. At 2009, I guess the city made a decision to pay a rate of paying two-thirds the rate difference between a resident and non-resident rate. And so then we kind of laid out what we paid. And so since the agreement moving forward, unfortunately, the Richmond Heights has been neglecting to charge the city for monthly electronic funds transfer, EFTs, or the monthly membership rates. So what they've been doing was been sending over all the annual funds, if you pay yearly, all up front at once, and then been neglecting to give charging the monthly membership rates. So industry standard, somewhere between 50 and 60% of all people pay monthly membership rates. We break it down, we're about 55%. So we obviously will see a large increase. We are seeing somewhere $59,000 we budgeted, and we're seeing what they budget, or they billed us $124,000. So it is something we were not expecting, obviously. We're going to talk about that at Ways and Means tomorrow, but that's kind of the quick update.
Well, Andy, did you want to chime in on the update?
Would you like to talk with me now, or would you like to talk with me tomorrow on Ways and Means? I'll move to tomorrow's. I'll defer to tomorrow, but I'll talk with you afterwards and at least give you a chance to at least bring something with you that might help make it palatable.
Just a messenger, remember.
Can I just ask one question?
Sure.
And I guess actually Ebola, the recommendation is going to be to pull this from fund balance.
That,
Okay, go ahead.
yeah, I mean, that is my recommendation. And if we budgeted 59,000, so if you look at that, that leaves about a little bit over $94,000. So if we try to budget that with about another 130,000, if we think about a little bit of an increase, that's about $220,000 for next year. That's a 130,000. That's a large increase of something I'd have to find savings in my budget for next year. And so that's why I'm making the recommendation too. If we have to, we have
It
to.
could be savings or we not do something.
But they've offered to defer part of it to next year.
Right.
Yeah, that is something they've done, but that is something they've offered. But yeah, if we do it, the question is, if we defer to next year, where would that come from? It either have to come from saving somewhere, capital project somewhere. So that's the real question.
All of the above.
Well, how does that look to, as we go to possibly bondholders for this borrowing of money when we're
I'm
whittling away on
concerned
fund balances.
with the rate at which we're bringing requests to the different committees to tap into fund balance. It's become, just regular now. And I asked Karen to do an analysis. I don't know whether she's prepared to speak to that now, or are you? You're on the general fund and not stormwater and parks fund. But generally, if you have sat through any one of these committees, that's the norm now.
Yep.
And we didn't used to do that. And if we get into a pattern of doing that, then we're not growing toward meeting that 50%. And what always has to be at the back of your mind is we're going to be going before Standard & Poor's in a couple of months. And because of fund balance alone, instead of just having one meeting that we typically have when we go before Standard & Poor's, last year, we had 2 meetings. So they're looking at that.
Particular analysis had to do with Dan, the last meeting, the streets and the ADA compliance. And the request was to take it out of fund balance. So I did a quick analysis of going to fund balance and because what we need to look at is the reserves. And at the end of the budget year of 19, what we adopted, the capital reserve in the capital improvement fund was 4.76, and as you know, our fund balance policy is 5% for that fund for capital reserves. So we weren't meeting it, but we were still anticipating over $600 going into fund balance. Reducing the fund balance reduces the reserve to 4.15%, and the fund balance again is a 5%, and that decrease is 25%. I didn't do the same quick, it's not that hard of an analysis to do on the stormwater, but Bola's correct because they look at that. They will look at that and say, in fact, they said to us, Bolas, you're not even meeting your policy right now. How do you expect to pay for this if you're dipping into your fund balance? Now, on this particular item, when it comes to Ways and Means tomorrow night, it's great to be proactive and to get an approval from the Ways and Means to take it, because that would have to go to the board for a budget amendment. We normally don't do the budget amendments till towards the end of the year when we see where we're coming in at, because it's possible we won't need to dip into fund balance. There'll be money savings elsewhere. And I'm pretty sure of one right now off the top of my head. I don't want to say it yet because it hasn't gone to the right committees, but there's some money there. So to say we're going to take it out of fund balance is probably not the best thing to say. The option to, once the board decides to do that, might be the better words to say, but I would recommend that we wait to do any fund balance, anything with it, until later on in the year when we see the overall picture of how revenues are coming in with expenditures, and take it from savings if we can.
All right, thanks, Karen.
Yeah, the only thing to add is I know that we haven't taken anything from fund balance in rec and stormwater in my years here. I know last month we did make the recommendation to take something from rec and stormwater, I think for the road, I think for it's a high school in Brentwood, so there is that out there. So that is, if we're looking at Standard & Poor's, there might be that to kind of consider. So that is something, that I didn't think about as I was making this recommendation. So as Karen said, we do have that option with Richmond Heights to kind of look at that, and we're always happy to try to tighten belts and do things like that for next year as well.
Eric, did you get a chance to see a printout from Richmond Heights of who all these residents are that we've never seen?
Oh yeah, I take a look at that every year.
Okay.
Yeah.
The board this afternoon.
In fact,
So-
I have yet to see an email,
Yeah.
so you'll have to forgive me. I was more concentrated on this.
I thought you would want to see that.
Oh,
and
you
it's an
know I will.
So we've
And I'll be
taken
honest.
names off and made it available.
I took probably about 20 different addresses off because some of them were in Rock Hill, some of them were in Richmond Heights. So my job is to make sure that all those addresses are actually Brentwood addresses. That is my job, yeah.
Thank you. You're helping me.
Sure.
Thank you, Eric.
You're welcome.
Move on to the consent agenda. All we have is minutes on there. If there's no changes to the
Motion to
minutes,
approve.
all in favor of approving the consent agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Move on to old business. We have the RFP on the 8746 Ukulele next to the firehouse.
Yep.
Guess that's you, Dan.
If you recall, you guys already approved the hazardous materials assessment, and I gave you a copy of that just for your own benefit if you wanted to look at it. So they did find asbestos, which we figured it's in the siding, it's old transite siding, it's in the window caulking, and it's actually in some floor tiles downstairs in the basement. So that had to be included in the demolition RFP. It was. We only received 2 bids back on the 8th for this. So the lowest and most responsive is Steve's Hauling and Excavating at $24,500. I was asked how it compared to what we did a few years ago. So just today I put that information on there. So back in 2017, the same company, Premier, had actually bid on it, but they were thrown out because they were late. They didn't meet the deadline in time. But when you looked at the different residents or facilities that we tore down then, they were a lot cheaper. So I don't know if the costs have gone up for the businesses, or maybe because there were 3 and this is only 1 plus a garage, they're more expensive. But again, we only received 2. It was competitive. It was bid per our purchase policy. But it is higher than what we had in the budget, but we haven't made other capital purchases, and we do have savings like on the shed that we put at Strassner and things like that. So I'm not asking for any more money. Just know that it's gonna go over the 21,000. We were looking at maybe 19,000 for the demo and 2,000 for the testing when we put the budget together a year ago. So this is greater than the 19, but you know, it's roughly $5,000 over the difference between the 2 pieces combined versus what we have in the budget. But if it's, you know, good with you guys, we can go ahead and do a resolution, approve this company, get it torn down. And as part of that cost, they'll also do a second mobilization, because they'll stop after they do abatement, so they'll remove all the asbestos. The firemen will get basically a month to do their training in the house, whatever it is that they do. And then they'll tell us when they're ready to have the contractor move back in and then tear it out. So foundation will be gone, garage will be gone.
Did Steve's Hauling pass or whatever, the background checks and stuff that we've
They
seen?
did, they provided references. They work
References.
for City of DeSoto and,
So we're not getting a fly-by-night.
right, yeah.
Okay.
They actually submitted their insurance certificate. They submitted like the whole shebang, like they were gonna get it. So the contract is pretty much put together.
If there's no further discussion, I'll make the recommendation to move to the full board,
Second.
the Steve Hauling and evacuation at 24,500. And if I'm not mistaken, we are not looking at a time-sensitive issue, but we only have 1 meeting, so could we do a first and second reading at that meeting to get this moving?
I was just gonna do a resolution if it's all the same to the city administrator.
I don't know that a resolution, does that?
Yes.
That will do it?
Yes.
Super, so do it for the July meeting?
All in favor, say aye.
Aye. Thank you, guys.
Stick around, Dan, because we have a streetlight
Yes.
RFP update. Finally had somebody bid on this, huh?
Yeah, if you recall from the last time, I had bad news at 0 to give you. I did contact 6 of them, and of the 6, 4 were ones that I had contacted, and we also had a couple others drift in. So Reinhold was the lowest at $69,850, and I thought, well, maybe there was a mistake since there was quite a bit of separation between first and second. I called them, and they said that no, they could do it for that roughly $70,000. So I said, well, if you made a mistake, now's your time to tell me, and we won't pursue this any further. But they said they could do it because they put the same unit price per light. That's why I gave you the detailed Excel spreadsheet, because it's the same regardless of whether you ran 200 feet or 100 feet. But they said they could do it. So, and I mean, they're a reputable company. They actually put the electrical connection in this room for the monitors and stuff like that, and they've worked for IT.
Did they say how long it would take to accomplish getting the first 20 done?
We haven't gone over the timeline yet. I was going to save that. If this moves through the full board, then we would have a construction meeting to figure out what order they were going to work them in. I wanted to see so that we can get advance notice to the people, if
When it
it's
will
Ward
happen.
3 or Ward 2, we would say, hey, it's these lights at these intersections. We think these are going in the month of August or September, or whatever it is.
Motion, if I may, if it's appropriate, forward to the full board, the Reinhold Electric at $69,850.
Second.
I just have one question, Bull. Did this start in public safety or?
For this particular item?
Yeah,
I don't
do we-
think so.
No,
but we've discussed it there, right?
Yeah, we
Yeah,
discussed it both.
there's a lot of, what is it, cross-pollination of items?
All right,
Commingling of items, thank you.
okay, we'll just keep it here and forward it on to the board. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right. Thank you, Dan.
Okay, thank you.
all right. Now,
Last item, I guess this is you, Lisa. We're talking about the stormwater drainage control.
All right, thank you. Yes, at the last meeting, we talked about a variety of storm drainage issues that we have here in the community. Again, if you recall, I kind of break them into two major categories. Those that are relatively new get called in. It's based maybe upon building permits that the department has issued for new construction or building additions. And then we have another general category of existing conditions and how do we deal with those. I thought tonight with having the MSD presentation, I think maybe there's some hope here to kind of work on some of the existing conditions that we have. But I definitely felt like where we left off at the last meeting was that there isn't a whole lot in our code books to enforce. So it comes down to looking at how we would maybe put in some stormwater drainage control ordinances and then actually have something in our department to enforce. So with that, I think it would make sense instead of us trying to do a lot of the research ourselves and go through this whole process, if we could maybe contract with someone who has had some experience with other municipalities, knows what other communities are doing right now, what maybe some communities are more comparable to Brentwood that we could kind of start with, at least with models. So again, hearing at the last meeting that there's got to be more we can do. We'd like to do more. And so the proposal we had in front of you this evening was to consider hiring Horner and Schifrin. They drafted a proposal that's before you tonight. Largely what this is going to do, I'm not going to say that maybe we couldn't come up with some type of ordinance that we could apply to existing conditions, but kind of keep it in mind that this is largely to come up with a stormwater drainage control ordinance that we would enact certainly on any cases of new construction and building additions. There's definitely a lot more latitude that we can do when we issue a building permit of requiring additional stormwater requirements. So with that, I would ask for the committee's consideration and pass on to the board the hiring of Horner and Schifrin to help us start sifting through the stormwater drainage control ordinance, reviewing other communities, putting a program in place and giving us something that we definitely can work with. So Horner and Schifrin is here tonight if you have questions for them or questions for myself or the city administrator.
This was fun, you have funds within your budget to accomplish getting this task done.
So
This was completely off the wall, so we're, again, pulling out money somewhere.
From a budgetary standpoint.
Yes, budgetary only. Yes, it's a problem, we need to address it.
at least the common thread is stormwater. So we could use stormwater funds for this type of
Yes,
activity.
Motion to take it to the full board with the recommendation to use stormwater funds to pay for it.
for first and second reading, all at one time, because you'd be at the end of August before,
Resolutions, so they would be,
adjusted in. so
One-
we're gonna
one-time
see the
reading.
actual- We're gonna see the actual meeting money when we do the budget adjustments then. Since we haven't budgeted for it,
right,
I pass a resolution that says, let's get it done.
right.
I don't address how I really funded it till you come back to us saying,
will.
2019,
We
I
will
need
have
the
to do
following
that.
adjustment.
We will have to do that.
Okay, and that's why we can do a resolution versus let's get an ordinance and a
Yes.
service contract.
Right.
Second the motion.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, thank you, Lisa. Last thing is water shut-off valve at 9340 White Avenue, and I think this is Eric.
How did we get here?
Yeah, I'll try to make this quick, as quick as possible. So we had a resident contact staff about his property at 9340 White Avenue. Basically, he cannot get access to his water shutoff valve because of the street tree located in the right-of-way adjacent to his property. We kind of took a look at it. We kind of came up with 3 different options that we listed. You can cut away a portion of the trunk of the tree to try to get access to it, but the trunk will still kind of grow. And then also you're basically creating the possibility of the tree to become diseased and infected, and then basically creating a possibility of the tree to fail and causing property damage. You can remove the tree. That is 27-inch diameter at breast height pin oak, which has multiple decades left of growth. Or we could have, a plumber could relocate the water shutoff valve. Looking at the difference in price, we looked at some different plumbers. You can do moving the shutoff valve closer to the house for $1,500, $1,545. The cost to remove the tree would be $2,500. So moving the water shutoff valve would be a little bit cheaper. Now there is obviously the reason we're bringing it here is the tree is our property. The water shutoff valve is obviously the homeowner's property. So it is kind of the thought process of what should we do and how should we do it? Do we ask the homeowner to do it and maybe we reimburse them? Do we just do the cleaner route of removing the tree? That's kind of why we're here today.
I'll ask the question of the city administrator. I understand the problem, but I'm putting public money into fixing a private property. I don't think we're allowed to do that. Thus, the only real solution is the tree is the problem. I got to lose the tree. It's my tree. That's the only way I can do the work. Yes, but that's the only solution. Otherwise,
Right.
can I authorize the homeowner to do this work? Because it's my tree, the city, public, not his. So yes, I'm afraid we have to just take the tree. And I hate doing that, but it's got to be done.
I agree.
The option is to take the tree or let the homeowner relocate it.
Well, I just ask, and the answer is
We don't have to pay for anything, we just,
No, if they relocate on their own, then the cost is theirs. If we remove the tree, then it
solve
stays
the
where it
problem,
is.
yes.
but I don't think, by the looks of those pictures, removing the tree isn't gonna solve that. It's not gonna open up that tee to be usable, right?
It should. Once we remove it and remove the stump, they'll give access to that.
I would make the suggestion that staff approach the homeowner, because I think there's some aesthetic value. They may wish to entertain moving their own water line to accomplish it.
What is that cost for the homeowner to move the water line?
The quote we had was $1,500.
So
Yes.
the homeowner might want to pay or not pay that.
The dilemma is I can't use the public money
Right.
to do that. So he has 2 choices. He can pony up and do the movement, or if he thinks it needs to be done, the city has to remove the tree. But he may think aesthetically, I don't want to lose that tree, so he may come up with the 1,500. I would approach the homeowner with the 2 options and see how he responds. That's the motion.
Second.
All right, all in favor, say aye.
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 All right, thank you very much.
Motion,
Oh, we got citizen comment.
yes, sir, I'm sorry.
Tom, did you have a comment, I believe?
Greetings, I'll try to be brief. Thomas Kramer, 8933 South Swan Circle, resident, and within the last 3 years, find myself a happy father. Thank you. And on that topic, This was a public safety and a public works item. Spoken to the director of parks about this, seemed amenable, but wanted to make sure the committee knew about it. Maybe it could be on the radar screen. In terms of timing, Memorial Park has a wonderful playground set for the kids, the younger ones and the older ones. There's 2 different playgrounds there. The one that's closer to Strassner Road currently is, and before I had a child, apparently, I didn't realize it's treacherous. It's close to Strassner without any fencing. There's a pathway that goes between the park playground and the street, but there is nothing impeding the children, who are very adventurous, I find out, from running towards the street. If there was a pony wall type or a short type of fence, spoke once again with Eric about this, it seems like it probably would at least handle the emergency, keep that from happening. Parents should always watch out for their children, but that particular park with that particular age group next to that particular street is not as safe as it could be. I feel like I heard there's some money in the budget, but I don't know what the time frame would be if something like that could happen. So my request is for the committee, if they could please, to explore that and see if that could be on the timetable soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Eric, would maybe you be able to bring something to us next meeting? Okay. All right, thank you. Anybody else? Motion to adjourn?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Would you like to